This episode is sponsored by a company who has truly found a solution to an age-old problem, and that is Karna bunker gear. One of the most prevalent conversations in the fire service is should we or should we not train in our bunker gear? Now, the answer to both is yes. As most of us are aware, the carcinogens from structure fires, of which there are over 260 that are dangerous to human health, not to mention the PFAS and other chemicals that are within our gear from the manufacturing process, are factors that we obviously want to minimize. Now, the other side of the coin is that we do need to train in our gear. There is no way to acclimatize the heat retention and lack of mobility than to actually wear the gear. So seeing this problem himself, firefighter and exercise physiologist Ryan Conley developed a carcinogen-free gear at a much lower cost that can be used in non-IDLH atmosphere and training that does not require puncture or tear resistance. Now, as someone who always trained in gear myself throughout my career, I wish this technology was around then. And I got to test it personally while coaching my tactical athlete class a few weeks ago, and can testify that it not only simulates the heat retention of frontline gear, but also the lack of mobility, which is imperative at operating at a high level on the fireground. Now, some additional benefits include being able to doff the gear when you do get banged out for a call, increasing the lifespan of your frontline bunker gear, and then also public education. Think of the number of times that we allow, for example, school children to wear our gear when it's infused with all these carcinogens. So there are so many real-world applications for a fraction of the cost of IDLH-rated bunker gear. So if you want to hear the whole story behind this, listen to my conversation with Ryan Conley on episode 1175 of the Behind the Shield podcast, or go to karnabunkergear.com. Welcome to the Behind the Shield podcast. As always, my name's James Gearing, and this week it is my absolute honor to welcome back onto the show former elite soldier, world championship athlete, and international musician, Ash Alexander Cooper. Now, if you missed my first conversation with Ash, it was episode 693. So in this second conversation, we discuss a host of topics, from reflecting on the lessons of COVID, the 7X Human Performance Project, his new book, Mindful Soldier, the impact of childhood trauma, the exciting and terrifying world of drones, forging elite mental performance, the healing power of altruism, and so much more. Now, before we get to this incredible conversation, as I say every week, please just take a moment. Go to whichever app you listen to this on, subscribe to the show, leave feedback, and leave a rating. Every single 5-star rating truly does elevate this podcast, therefore making it easier for others to find. And this is a free library of almost 1,200 episodes now. So all I ask in return is that you help share these incredible men and women's stories so I can get them to every single person on planet Earth who needs to hear them. So with that being said, I welcome back onto the show, Ash Alexander Cooper. Enjoy. Well, Ash, I want to start by saying welcome back to the Behind the Shield podcast. The last time we spoke was actually November 2022 on episode 693.
You've done a few.
Yeah, that was at the halfway point. I'm almost at 1,200 now. So,
Wow.
So where on planet Earth are we finding you this morning?
I am actually in London today. It's been a pretty mad year. I just had to, for my work, tell them how many days I'd spent overseas this year, and it's about 6 months. So it feels a bit like being back in uniform, honestly, on an operational deployment somewhere. But I'm now back in the UK, which is technically home. So I'm hoping that that's the last travel for the year.
What is taking you traveling now in 2025?
My main job is I lead the international business for an airspace security company called Drone by Axon, and airspace security really in our world is all about counter drone technology. So we're clearly fairly topical at the moment with the number of incidents that are happening globally with drone incursions, whether it's on the battlefield or at nuclear sites, or potentially impacting presidents, prime ministers, sporting events, super yachts, data centers, you name it. And we protect a lot of those globally. So it's been quite busy, and it's getting busier by the minute.
Without obviously going into any area that you can't talk about, with your military background and now this role that you hold, talk to me about the evolution of the use of this technology, and then what are some of just kind of the overarching dangers for the general public that maybe we should know about?
Well, I mean, I talk about this quite a lot, actually, when I've had to think about the kind of threats that I faced when I was in uniform. And as you know from our previous chat, I've been lucky or unlucky to have been shot a couple of times, blown up a couple of times, had a couple of helicopter crashes and suicide bombers and stuff that I've survived attacks from. Of all those incidents and many others, gun battles and other things with colleagues around the world, when I think back to those times, not a single one of those incidents caused me to ever have to look up, really, to worry about what might be coming from above. The world is clearly very, very different. Back then, we owned the airspace. We had either air superiority or air supremacy. And so what drives me now is to try and see what we can do to help those who are in a very different battlefield if they happen to be deployed somewhere nasty. But equally at home, the threat from a $200 drone against a sporting event or a stadium is, incredibly high. And it doesn't have to be a state actor to do quite a lot of harm if they chose to. So what we're now doing is obviously trying to identify in real time for as many of our customers that need it, the kind of threats that are flying around that may just be, in some cases, ill-educated or novice flyers that don't know quite how dangerous it is to fly an aircraft, or fly a drone rather, very close to an airfield to get a cool picture of a plane coming into land. That's very, very dangerous, if you misjudge the distance, or a drone were to go into the air intake or just hit the plane. So that's what we're doing, is to try and educate as well as provide technology that enables people to understand what malicious activity may be, or illegal activity may be happening, but also enable good drones to fly, whether it's medical supplies or deliveries or whatever. It's just that lower airspace we're now trying to help ensure is properly understood, protected, and so it can be safe.
Well, let's expand on that for a second. What are the incredible innovations when it comes to, as you mentioned, whether it's delivery of medical supplies, whether it's firefighting, any other areas, the law enforcement side, that this application is being used for the greater good rather than military or, God forbid, terrorism? Yeah,
I mean, you see it every day. I mean, I see a lot of it, stuff online. China seems to be doing some pretty interesting things with drones, everything from massive drones that are connected to, from your world of firefighting, with huge hoses that are attached to them, and then suddenly they can reach the 50th floor of an apartment block and try and help put the fire out before the entire building is destroyed or people are killed or burned in it, through to mountain rescues, and I mean all sorts of things. The ways in which this could be used as technology for good is incredible. But I think, unfortunately, the focus tends to be at the moment on all the bad ways that one could use this technology, and we're seeing it obviously playing out in Ukraine every day, and that's where we see the fastest innovation of the threat and then the response, and that timeline between the good guys coming up with a response or a way to mitigate the threat posed by bad guys is getting shorter and shorter. The cycle is just speeding up all the time. So it's a difficult space to be in. So we haven't picked an easy world to be working, but it's certainly a fascinating place, and you certainly can feel that you can do good every day, and that matters to me and my team in terms of purpose.
Have you crossed paths with Richard Browning?
No, we're connected, but no, I've not actually not worked with him in terms of his technology, but looks pretty cool.
Yeah. So what was interesting when we spoke, he obviously has the kind of like the Iron Man jetpack, basically, but he was talking about the ability to put a paramedic in, a wilderness event. So someone, mountaineer falls off or something, sending the medic up with, the bag on their back, treating the patient, putting them in a stretcher, but then a drone is actually what would carry them back. Because I guess technically you can't have a manned drone. You can't fly with the patient because of FAA rules. or the British equivalent, but you can send it down with a drone and then have the ambulance at the bottom waiting to receive the patient. So it was interesting seeing that the potential, especially in, like you said, high-rise events, or some austere environment where you can access a patient with some of these technologies now.
Yeah, no, yeah, absolutely. And I think that the challenge with really serious injuries is that stabilization piece, that you wouldn't want to fly somebody if they are serious enough to need to be evacuated medically by air, whether it's by helicopter or by drone or some other means. The chances are they're pretty unstable, and that time, it depends how much time it's going to take, obviously, to fly them back to the main ambulance or the hospital. But I think that's the challenge for a lot of folks now, is like, if I were to send somebody and they were to deteriorate during that flight, there's nobody there to do anything about it. So it's a challenge, but I think the opportunities are immense, if we want to find good ways to use this technology.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, even the automation of compressions, with some of these auto pulses that we have now, the auto vents. I mean, technically, you could, in theory, set them up with drips, all things, and then send them down where the machines are basically keeping them stable. So
Yeah.
who knows? We shall see.
Yeah.
When I saw some of the footage coming from that horrendous event in Bondi Beach, there was now just surfaced drone footage of, sadly, far too graphic for the news, in my opinion, but it's showing, some of the casualties, the shooters. So talk to me about that, the novice, the wannabe, video Instagram star with their drones. What are the challenges, and then also, like you said, even the potential domestic terrorism or any terrorism threats of the lone wolf, as opposed to, as you mentioned, the Ukraine, where it's an actual military force?
Yeah. I mean, Australia is a place that I've spent a lot of time this year. We've been growing our support to the nation's security there over the last couple of years, just quietly building it up in the background. And we now protect every state and territory in Australia. So we are actually deployed currently. Obviously, me not personally, but we have technology that is in and around Bondi to help with that follow-up with the law enforcement and emergency services working down there. What we have found just in somewhere like Australia, but it's indicative of any Western country, really, the proliferation of drones, the ease with which one can purchase without any piloting skills. As long as you've got a few $100s, you can buy a drone. And I'm sure you are as well, being inundated with Christmas Instagram adverts for buy the drone that follows you cycling or skiing or whatever. The technology is there to make it very easy for people to get quite cool footage of stuff that they might do, whether they're Instagram influencers or just people who want to record some of the cool stuff they're doing. With that, the risk of just more things flying is clearly a challenge. And that's, as I said, what we're trying to do, is to help our customers understand the totality of what may be flying in that lower airspace that could be used for good, might be harmful, or maybe downright being used deliberately for something illegal or terrorist related. So half the battle with a lot of our customers, including in Australia, is to help quantify what is actually happening in real time, day to day. And of all the sites that we protect across Australia, we don't cover everything, but we cover most major cities and stadiums and everything else across different government organizations. We're now seeing up to 125,000 drone alerts or drone activities a month, which is a lot more than people anticipated for a relatively small, in population terms, a small country. The US is clearly orders of magnitude more than that, and Europe is equally going up pretty rapidly. So for the first challenge for any organization, emergency services or otherwise, that's trying to keep the public safe, is to understand what actually is flying. And you referenced Bondi. I haven't seen the footage. I wouldn't seek it out. I've seen plenty of that kind of thing in the past and don't need much more of it. But I think where we can find ways that if people happen to be flying, they've not gone there deliberately just to try and capture unpleasant imagery, but if they happen to be flying and capture something that could be used usefully to understand pre-attack, during attack, or post-attack, so that helps the government officials actually understand what went on and potentially prosecute or understand if the threat is more broad than that isolated incident, then there are ways that we should be trying to leverage that footage and those flights to for good. But the first hurdle is to understand what actually is there and should it even be there or not.
One last area, two things on the drones, then we'll move on. But firstly, as a first responder, we used to be told about secondary devices. You go to an explosion, 7/7 is a perfect example. The responders all flock there, and now there's another bomb in the trash can, or when we were young, IRA even.
Yeah, yeah.
When it comes to airspace first, what are the forces that are working against drones going into Wembley Stadium or whatever? And then what about also the privacy? Can a drone sit above your garden and film you, or are there things that are stopping that happening as well?
Well, there's clearly in any country there'll be areas of restricted airspace. It may be over government buildings, the King Queen's Palace, or certainly airports and critical national infrastructure. So if drones are trying to fly inside those spaces, then that should alert. If you have systems in place to detect those flights, then that will alert the emergency services or law enforcement to know that something is there that it shouldn't be, if it's not been registered to be there officially and legally. But I don't think there's necessarily anything. I mean, every country is clearly different, but we support a number of, let's say, high-profile people who do have systems now to understand what is happening if people were trying to hover over their house or see who's there or what's going on. But it is quite difficult, I think, in many jurisdictions to actually make that illegal if it's open airspace, if it's not part of a restricted zone. But in terms of Wembley, what was the question specifically again on a stadium?
So as far as the Wembley Stadium, what I was saying was, now, as you said, the kind of restricted airspace, what are the things that are in place to stop a drone going over Buckingham Palace or Wembley Stadium that may be a threat to the security there?
Yeah, so the way that you need to think about airspace security, and particularly in the counter-drone space, is a layered approach to both detection and defeat. And in terms of detection, there are different types of sensors that might be appropriate or affordable or available to be used legally by those sites. Radio frequency detection is generally the foundational layer. It's the longest range, the best bang for buck in most cases. And that basically is looking for the signature or the signal, like an ID of the drone that's flying. So it might tell you that here is the pilot, where the pilot's flying the drone from, here is the live location of the drone, and here is the home location where the drone took off from for that flight. Within that, it'll be looking for the frequency the drone's flying on. Any other sort of data that's related to that individual drone should be able to be detected, which would then tell you it's a DJI something, or it's an Autel something, or it's a Skydio something. So that's the RF layer, which is for 95% of most of the world is fine. But where you have non-standard or drones that are deliberately being made or flown in a way that is designed to not be standard, let's say, Ukraine is a good example where there are lots of non-standard drones there, then you might be blind to that signature in radio frequency terms. And that's when you would seek to add things like cameras for optical detection and radar, which even if it's a fiber optically flown drone that has no RF signature and is therefore much harder to see and detect, you will still not be able to hide from the radar. So that's the sort of layered approach to detection. There are other sensor modalities like acoustics, but generally those three are the main thing: RF plus camera or radar. And then defeat, it really depends what legally you're allowed to do. On the battlefield, you might be able to use laser or bullets or shotguns or whatever it may be. Domestically, it's a lot more restricted, as you would expect and hope. But you can jam RF, which means that you would be trying to block the signal from the pilot to the drone. So the drone would suddenly not be knowing what it's being asked to do. And what generally happens in those scenarios is the drone might go into a hover to try and see if it can reconnect with the pilot. If not, then it will go home, which is fine unless the home location has been spoofed. And we do see increasing cases of that, not generally domestically anywhere, but in sort of combat environments where the home has been made to be the target. So if you're only legally allowed to jam the radio frequency and the drone then goes home, but home isn't home, you might have actually made the problem worse or not certainly made it better. You can then in another non-kinetic way jam the GPS signal, but again, many countries don't allow a lot of that to happen. But if you had the first scenario where the drone is going to carry on to its target because the home has been spoofed, the only way to stop that happening is to jam the GPS signal to the drone so it won't know where home is, regardless of whether home is really home or not. So it's a fascinating space. I mean, I'm not technical, only technical enough really to be dangerous, but these concepts, we've got much more clever people than me who are doing AI, track fusion and all sorts of risk-based prioritization and various clever algorithms that understand what is actually flying and happening in real time, so that we can present to the users a single version of the truth, so that somebody who's under pressure in a police ops room or an emergency room can make a quick decision and make the right decision about what to do about a threat before it goes bang or does something unpleasant.
See, I'm glad that we went down this rabbit hole. Obviously, we're going to be talking about the book, but this is something that, I've never heard before. I mean, Richard Browning's probably the closest. And then I had a police officer recently that they use drones for going into an event. So again, let's say you've got Sydney. Now you've got a police drone. Okay, who have we got? Where are they? Okay, they're on the bridge. And now obviously they can figure out the strategy from there. While they're in explosives, which they actually found on that scene, if I'm not mistaken. But then, on the other side, it's terrifying. I for years, I was a stuntman and I did the Terminator 2 show. And in that show, there are drones that chase, the robots.
Yeah.
And then here we are now. It's crazy. But so with you having been boots on ground in a lot of these conflicts that we've seen recently as a soldier, what is the future of warfare? Because as you alluded to, some of these, drone strikes are horrendous to watch when they've got, some of the video attached to them. We see the same thing in Gaza, for example, especially when it's not even combatants that are being targeted. What is the future going to hold? Are we going to ultimately have drone versus drone from country, or, what, let me put it a different way. Optimistically, what do you hope it will look like? And then pessimistically, where is the bad side of where this could go?
I mean, to answer your first bit of the question, I think it's not a sexy answer, but essentially the future of warfare is data. Who can get the most accurate data in the right format, in the right time to make decisions, potentially autonomously, to know what the best thing to do is on a battlefield or in the airspace around the things that you care about, that you're seeking to protect. It's going to be about the ability for us to share data securely, safely, and quickly at the right time in the right place to make the right decisions. I mean, we're already seeing sort of not necessarily drone on drone, but unmanned on unmanned. And that's going to be a growing feature of both air forces, Navy fleets, you name it. We are going to be moving away rapidly, I would suggest, from large totemic aircraft carriers and carrier groups to a lot more speedier, smaller, literal vessels that don't require, years of development and billions of dollars worth of design, etc., that could be taken out with a single missile that can go, supersonic from many thousands of miles away, and your entire platform on which you are relying to launch your other things from become completely obsolete. So I think the non-sexy answer is that it's going to be all about data. And when I talk a lot to the media at the moment about the European threat, obviously people are looking east and very worried about what the threat is going to evolve to become closer to home. Clearly, Ukraine is suffering daily from an onslaught of drones and other things. Those countries, I'm seeing the further west you get, the sort of more, not necessarily lackadaisical, but it's a less urgent threat than perhaps people realize could be impacting us tomorrow if we were unlucky. And while there's a focus on a concept you may have heard called the European drone wall, which is a nice idea, and it should absolutely be part of the solution, where you've got a not necessarily impenetrable wall, but a wall of detection that is looking east and is able to see the threats well before they get to your actual border. That's great, but what if the threat is already behind you? We saw back in the summer with an operation that was widely publicized called Spider's Web, where the Ukrainians were already thousands of kilometers inside Russia when they launched their attack. So if we'd been on the border just looking for the threats coming over the border, it's already behind us. So for me, and what we've done in Australia and what we're trying to do in other countries as well across the globe with our customers, is to start to create networks of capability, cost effectively, affordably, and scalable, that allow entire nations to connect their different data points together, so that what might be happening in northern Norway that may be undetected, or it may be happening but we can't share the data at the moment, we should be able to connect absolutely, not just even within Norway, but across all the other Eastern European, all the countries that border Eastern Europe, to say, is that kind of probing activity in the north or in Estonia or Latvia or Lithuania the same thing that we're seeing in Poland or in Ukraine or elsewhere, and then be able to connect the different types of threats that may be coming from the same adversary that we need to really understand quickly, because it won't take long before some of that activity will export to everywhere else.
Getting away from drones now and kind of heading towards what we're going to be talking about for the bulk of this conversation, from a human perspective, I'm literally reading 1984 at the moment, which was written in the 1950s, and I swear to God, Orwell could be sitting here today writing his book based on what's going on at the moment, to the point where he even alludes to the fact that apart from some, in theory, special operations teams supposedly doing things, that the war is pretty much being fought autonomously. And the goal is to basically affect resources and keep the populace to a certain level of obedience, so that they don't question the powers that be. So anyway, wherever you are, whatever you lean politically, there's a lot of truth in that. How, with so many lessons in history, A, do we not learn our lesson? And B, how do we turn this around so that humanity is not constantly at war with each other? I know we're talking this super macro conversation, but ultimately we were all little children that ran around chasing a ball once. We were all blank canvases at one point.
Yeah, who didn't see color, who didn't see religion, who didn't see any of those things that we learn over time. I mean,
Exactly.
I've been in so many situations where, I mean, I grew up not in a religious household, but I was a singer in a cathedral choir. So, you're just immersed in religion from an early age because you were singing in a choir and it was in a big cathedral and everything else. I wouldn't say I'm religious at all. I'm more spiritual than religious because I've seen so many unpleasant scenarios around the world that I've helped try and solve or be part of the cleanup, or maybe some would say been part of the problem, that has been for many religious based or religion based. And I find it frustrating that, for me, it's all about respect. But I think the challenge is that and maybe the digital world is not helping here, that it's very easy to say something unpleasant or be disrespectful and rude or just downright mean because you don't ever have to confront that person in real life. I don't think the world was necessarily a kinder place in the past, but it certainly doesn't feel like it's going in the right direction for us to be more tolerant or respectful of other people's views. There are some things that I wouldn't necessarily want to have rammed down my throat day to day in the country or the places that I live. But I'm absolutely respectful that everyone has a right, unless they're doing something illegal or dangerous that will harm others, that people should have the right to be able to express how they want to. And I think my biggest worry is that we as a global society are very quick to pick sides, and whoever is not on your side becomes the enemy. And that's very, very dangerous, I think, not just politically, but even for communities. And it won't lead to us being more sort of cohesive as a group. And that's partly, with the book that I talk a lot about the community aspect and people finding their tribe. Doesn't matter what your tribe is, but it's really important. We as humans, our DNA is to be part of a group, whatever their group might be. And so for people to feel alone, isolated, attacked and targeted is clearly damaging for individuals and for groups that feel oppressed. So, we just, I don't know, maybe it's a slightly simplistic, naive view, but I just wish people could accept that others have different views and just live and let live.
I've said this on here many, many times. I'm exactly like you. Grew up in the Church of England, went to a C of E school, was a choir boy for a heartbeat, not to the level that you were. And so was exposed to Christianity. And kind of like yourself, I, as a very young boy, took a step back and went, well, yeah, but these are kind of obvious, things that were being taught. And so when I, had friends that were then Sikh and, Muslim and all these other cultures, again, like I'm hanging around, hopefully, with people I perceive as nice people. So we have the same tenets, we have the same philosophies. And I think that this ancient wisdom, whether it's in a religious perspective or whether it's, Greek or Roman or whatever it is, ultimately you could sum it up in don't be a dick. Like that's pretty much what they're all telling us. So to then split hairs about what your religion says and there's a lake of fire or, this many virgins or whatever the thing is, I think now you're missing the common denominator, which is, the love and empathy and community and kindness and service, the things a lot of us in uniform embody at our core. So this is what I'm seeing is if we can just refine that true north that a lot of these holy texts do talk about. I would argue that the Bible, for example, in my very white belt perspective, the Old Testament is like a cautionary tale, like an eye for an eye doesn't work. The New Testament is, love, kindness, turn the other cheek. We tried the war thing. It was shit. So try the other thing instead. So I wish that we could just see the universal messages of humanity rather than this kind of, pigeonholing of religious doctrine. And if you don't believe exactly what I believe, then as you said, then you're my enemy.
Yeah, I mean, one of my favorite videos in the world ever, and I'm sure you've seen it, is the kids that they put together, whether it's a black child with an Asian child or a disabled child with, whatever it may be, and said, right, what makes you different? And they're literally pointing at them going, he doesn't like tomatoes. They just don't think of the things that we automatically as adults go, well, that child's disabled, or that child's clearly a different ethnicity. It's like, yeah, his mum lives on the top of the hill and we live in town. It's a very different way of approaching the world, which I kind of wish we could all go back to.
Well, I literally made a post the other day because I realized that our generation, are you still Gen X? Are you within that parameter?
Oh, I don't know what I am. What's Gen X?
So, when were you born?
Maybe that puts me in a gen. I don't know what my gen is.
When were you born? What year?
73.
83?
73.
73. Okay, yeah, so we're the same because you just look a lot younger than me. So that's why I was thinking you were younger. So we are, the Gen X technically, but I mean, regardless, I was reflecting on like the way that we were raised in England. We had John Craven's news round, so we were told about what was happening around the world in a non-political way, through a child's lens. We had Blue Peter, where we were constantly encouraged to do jumble sales and all kinds of things to raise money for starvation in Ethiopia and the people that were affected in Rwanda. Yeah. And so you had this community and kindness and compassion. Now in America, they had Mr. Rogers, they had Bob Ross. So again, our generation was raised with kindness, comic relief, Live Aid. It was infused in our upbringing. And so shame on us for having so much, well, kids don't have that these days. It's very divisive and very, narcissistic and a lot of stuff. We had this message of kindness and compassion in our children's television. And now you have people of our age that are acting, the way they are in some areas. So I was pointing this out. If our generation can't be kind and compassionate to each other with the upbringing and the examples that we had, what chance do the younger generations have?
Yeah. And I think when they see, certainly, without making a political statement, but when they see politicians say and do things that are just not great on any level, just not okay to say, regardless of your status or role, after the death of somebody or whatever. It's just, if there are no boundaries, then where are people going to learn what right looks like?
If your loyalty is towards a human being and a political party versus the well-being of your country, then you have a problem. I think it's that simple. And this is what we see here. Like the die on your sword for a certain left or right leaning versus taking a step back and going, well, have either of these two groups actually made our country healthier, happier, safer? Then I think that's the question we have to ask. And if fundamentally you can look in the mirror and say, oh yeah, this person is the second coming of Christ, good on you. Carry on believing. If they're not a good person, then maybe we need to question the way we even choose these people in the first place.
Yeah. Okay.
All right. Well, then you and I did the interview, and then 2 years ago, I went on 7X. So I went around the world with a bunch of Navy SEALs and Delta guys and elite triathletes. And because I was support staff, 7 marathons, ideally 7 skydives and base jumps, and then an immersion on 7 continents in 7 days. And it was supposed to be a kind of observational study on how do you prepare for for something that would somewhat mirror a military deployment or military a wildland fire, etc. Beat them down during this process, and then how can we kind of rehab them after? Creation of a manual, which, by the way, the manual and documentary, we just had a premiere last week, I think it was, or just over a week ago. So cool. Those will be coming finally after 2 years. Anyway, so we land in London, go to Hyde Park, which is where the runners were, and that's where you and I met. So just kind of as a side note, talk to me about your perspective of that experience.
Oh, well, I mean, I obviously didn't have much to do with it other than I wanted to support if I could and be there to see the team on, I don't know what stop that would have been. How far into it was the UK leg?
We had, oh my goodness, I think we had Colombia, then Dallas. So it was day 5. I was so freaking tired by that point.
Yeah,
I was
you were all quite tired. I mean, given that you were all doing so much running and all the other stupid things, I ended up, I wouldn't say accidentally, but I did a half marathon with the team just because I felt like I should do something. So I wasn't completely lazy and idle. But it was a really good atmosphere, and the team there. And I caught up with people I'd not seen for a very, very long time, which was great. And you had the bomb disposal person, was it Katie?
Katie Hernandez, yeah.
Who did her mile in the bomb disposal suit, which I helped support. So it was great. It was a great community, and I mean, like I said, I played no real part in it other than wanting to be a supporter and bringing a charity along that you very kindly supported in the form of Royal British Veterans Enterprise, as it now is called.
So speaking of that, what made them change? So they were RBLI. Now, as you mentioned, they're RBVE. What was the reason for the change?
There was quite a lot of confusion in the charity sector. I'm sure you're very aware is quite congested, and in the UK it's no different from other parts of the world. And there is another charity with a similar name, who is also a similar age, set up just after the First World War, and that was causing unnecessary friction and confusion between for all sorts of reasons. And the role of the charity had kind of not moved on, but they really have developed a very kind of enterprising way of working where, unlike a lot of charities that just, I'll not say just, but a lot of charities that give money and support to the beneficiaries in the form of grants or courses or whatever, RBV does that as well, but it also has a really clever add-on to the charity, which is a technically for profit, but it's a manufacturing facility that makes things, everything from road signs, from freeways and railways, and they just make stuff, and it's all staffed by veterans. And what makes it different, though, is that if you were a veteran who might be struggling and you want to get back into work to find your tribe, and but you don't feel like you're yet able to do a full 40-hour week or whatever it may be, they have the ability, because it's not trying to just make profit for profit's sake, that they will allow young James Gearing, who's coming out of a dark period where he's got maybe PTSD or he became homeless because a family breakdown or something happened, but you want to just start being part of something. They have the ability to say, James, don't worry, you can do 2 hours a week until you feel able to go up. No, you would not get that in any other place if you want to be employed. So that's just one example of this sort of enterprising nature of the way that they think about the solutions and helping people in novel ways to get back on track so that they can then thrive and grow. So it just felt like it was the right time. And we've got a brilliant logo, amazing artist who gave us the Tommy silhouette that you've seen. So we kept the Tommy and the colours, and RBVE launched at the House of Lords in London a month or so ago. And this is the start of the next phase of the journey. So I'm excited to continue being an ambassador for them and supporting them. And a third of, quite a lot of the proceeds of the book are going to be going to that charity.
I've still got my Tommy that you guys gave me on my bookshelf behind me, but it was funny. I just had an annual kind of hearing checkup, and there was actually a Tommy sticker on the perspex here in Ocala, Florida. Now, I don't know where it came from, but it was your Tommy, so it was funny. It just caught my eye the other day.
We've gone global. Excellent.
Yep. All right. Well, then speaking of that, so you and I, we're in Hyde Park. Since then, obviously, you told me that you were developing the book. Let's talk about Mindful Soldier. Where did the idea even come from? And then talk to me about your journey writing with your partner, Jessica Miller.
So I should say I'm an accidental or a reluctant author. I didn't mean to write a book. I genuinely had no plans to ever write a book. It was just not really what I thought about doing. And the idea about writing about anything personal seemed a bit indulgent, and I didn't know quite why it would be. It just didn't feel right, honestly. But I had enough friends who bullied me into saying, look, you've got so many random and arguably quite extreme examples of how you've come through various challenges in life and demonstrated resilience and grit and all those things. I've been lucky to have been in a number of elite teams, whether in sporting, competing internationally, or in other walks of life. And they said, if you could just capture some of those things that have helped you get through those challenging, extreme experiences, we think collectively that this would be of value to other people. And because I am really driven by, particularly since I retired from military active duty service, about trying to give back, not just to the military community, but to anybody that might be struggling. And I'm always a big proponent of making sure we don't forget the emergency services community, particularly in America, but globally, I think military veterans are put on a pedestal, and some of that is obviously welcome and relevant and right to do. But I always try to make the point that many military people, a vast majority of military veterans, have never seen combat, would never need to be in combat, and therefore are less likely to have been exposed to trauma. Whereas a young female paramedic, in the first month of her job after finishing training, she might be cutting babies out of cars on the freeway and attending house fires. And there may be more trauma in a month that a fire service paramedic or whoever firefighter may experience. So I wanted to make sure that anybody that serves is supported. So that's kind of what drives me generally. So I happened to be between jobs. I was lucky enough to get a bit of time where I was still getting paid while I moved from one company to another back in, I guess, 2021. It was sort of during COVID, 2020, 2021. And that was the time that I thought, if I'm going to do it, this is the window. I probably wouldn't take 6 months out of my life to do this unless I didn't have something else that I was doing. So that was kind of my window, which was the first problem, because there was so much self-induced pressure. I knew that my new job was starting on this date, and therefore I stupidly, quite early on, maybe sensibly, maybe stupidly, worked out that if I was going to get 80,000 words, which I thought was what I should be targeting maximum, that I would need to write X thousand words a day. And there were some days where I just couldn't string two sentences together. I was just like, I hate this. I really hate this. So I didn't enjoy the process, if I'm brutally honest, and I didn't do it as I'm led to believe you're supposed to do. You're supposed to find yourself an agent, then you do a pitch, and you maybe write a couple of chapters. I mean, you're an author, you know how it's supposed to be done properly. I've never done this before, so I just sort of made it up as I went along. Just dumped all my things on a page, tried to work out some themes. Then I found myself an agent and said, like, here's kind of a book maybe. And the first agent thought it was great, said don't change anything. But then we didn't get any deals, so ended up switching up, going to a different agent, had a bit more advice about how to package stuff. And we worked out there's probably about 2 books worth of content in there. And if we wanted it to be a useful book and not be seen as a memoir kind of thing, which I just wasn't cool with, then actually getting some sort of proper academic, well, not necessarily academic, but some scientific rigor around what actually is going on in the brain, it might be more useful to more people, because I wanted this to be broadly applicable, not just to the veterans or military-minded people that want to hear some sort of war stories of running around getting shot. So I managed to get Jess to agree to support the project. And she's a well-renowned neuropsychologist with a focus primarily in her career on policing trauma. So she knows emergency services really, really well and is written extensively on these topics. And so what we ended up doing is that I take, of the 12 chapters, they're kind of quite 12 distinct themes, whether it's childhood trauma, relationship breakdowns, getting out of your comfort zone, the fear of failure, loss, basically, relationship loss or loss of a loved one, power of community, and a bunch of other things in between. And then she takes my ramblings and then sort of says, right, this is what's actually going on in the brain. In layman's terms, to say this is why that kind of thing is hard. If you've had a relationship breakdown, or you've lost somebody, or you've lost your identity or changed jobs and you're struggling, this is why it's hard, because this is what the brain is trying to do to process that experience. And then we give some practical tips and advice and exercises on how, if you are going through that kind of thing and you're struggling to build your resilience or get through something, that these might help you do that. So that's kind of what happened. We found a publisher who took it. And I know you know this, but for your audience, then classic. I had to get government approval to publish, just because of having served. I wanted to do it properly and make sure that I had support from my sort of old employer, as it were. And then no sooner had we got the clearance to publish, the publisher went bust. It went into administration. It was like, you could not make this up. I just was so frustrated. We'd already lost a year waiting for that approval anyway, so it should have come out January last year. It's now going to be January 26. But they went bust, and it turned, and we thought we'd still get taken forward because they were setting up a new company the following day, which we thought great, although the alarm bells should have rung, because it was the same people that were basically setting up the new company, which happens a lot, I'm now led to believe. But they cancelled the book, it turns out, because they thought that all of the pre-sales we'd had, and there were many tens of thousands of dollars worth of pre-sales, they thought that we owed that to, or that they would have owed that to the charities that I was supporting, which again should have been an absolute red flag. Like the fact that Absolutely. They were willing to do it because they thought they were owed a charity money and thought they therefore could go bankrupt and not pay it and then move on clean and start again. But I was quite desperate at this stage to not lose the deal because I hadn't had lots of offers, because basically when I first went to the publishers, it didn't really know what it was going to be. The book was still a bit all over the place. So they agreed to take it again and stick to the same timeline. I thought, okay, fine, we've survived, and then they went bust again. So it's like So it's quite a special team to have been able to go into administration twice in quick succession. But as it turned out, although I freaked out at the time that it was all going to unravel and I'd let all these people down who'd bought books in the past and I couldn't repay them and all that sort of stuff, that really bothered me. We ended up, it could not have been better. We ended up going back to the market, and this time with a properly finished book that was a real thing that looked, I think I'm pretty proud of. There was a bit of a bidding war happened between two much bigger, more established, proper publishers. And so we ended up going with a publisher called Quercus, part of the Hachette Group and John Murray Group. So a big international organization, but this is a kind of a small team within a bigger org, so they can move quickly, and they were just absolutely brilliant. And I was fairly demanding, which those who know me wouldn't be surprised by that. But my demands were that we stick to the same publishing schedule, because I didn't want to lose another period of time. So it's going to come out in January, as I said, and that they had to honor the original orders, which they didn't have to do at all. But they said, no, we can see that this is not great, and I can see how much this bothers you. So we will honor all of the pre-orders that were made with the previous publisher, it just told me everything I needed to do, that we'd found the right home. And we haven't looked back. So I believe the book is literally coming off the press tomorrow or the next day, the physical copies. So I'll get one to you as soon as I get my hands on one, so you have one to read. And we go live in January, 22nd of Jan in the UK and 27th of Jan in the US and the rest of the world. And I'm giving 100% of the profits to charity. So this is genuinely, although it's my ramblings and my stories, it's not about me and it's not for me. I'm only willing to do it, and I'm only willing to pimp it and promote it and everything else because I want to raise as much money as I possibly can for these charities and help as many people as we can.
Amazing. Well, there's so many things I want to unpack, but while we're on the topic of charities, you talked about RBVE. Yeah. What other charities are you supporting?
So the other charity, the main one we're supporting, is Gurkha Welfare Trust. So when I started my military career, I joined a unit called the Gurkhas, which, for those who aren't familiar, is a long-standing tradition regiment in the British Army, manned by Gurkhas, Nepali soldiers. So all the soldiers are from Nepal. And that's been the case in the British Army since 1815, when, in classic British style, we were pushing north from India and came across these troublesome hill people in Nepal who were great fighters, and it was a bit of a stalemate. So rather than admitting defeat, the Brits then signed them up, and they've been serving alongside in the British Army ever since. So my heritage was in the Gurkhas, and for those who don't know Nepal, it's a hill, mountainous country, very, very poor. People live very much a hand-to-mouth existence, particularly in the hills where there's very few services and that kind of thing. And the Gurkha Welfare Trust does incredible work to not only disperse the pensions that the soldiers and their widows and families can draw, but they do projects to build schools and water wells and bridges between valleys so that communities don't have to walk for days to get to each other. They can sort of walk across a bridge, that kind of stuff. So it's a really amazing support network. And given that they gave me my start in the army, and Nepal is very close to my heart, and they're just amazing people, they hopefully will benefit from the money we raise.
I can't remember if I interviewed Nimsdai before or after we spoke, but I know in that conversation, I'm sure when you and I spoke, there was that news story a few years ago where the Gurkhas weren't getting the pension that, an equal British person will be entitled to. Has that been resolved? Has that improved?
Yeah, I mean, it was like many things in the media. It wasn't as simple as it sounded. The headline was that they're not treated the same as the Brits, and many of them don't get pensions. The reality at the time was that if you were a British soldier, you would need to serve 22 years to get a full pension. And many of the Gurkhas would be retired after 15 years because that was just the way that it worked. If you didn't promote, then you would leave after 15. So if you'd been a Brit, you also wouldn't get a pension. So it wasn't sort of apples for apples. But a lot of work has been done by many people over the years to make sure that there is parity, the ability for families to stay and settle in the UK after they've served 10, 15, 20 years in the British Army, making them go back to Nepal and reapply for residency in the UK was clearly not fair, given that we allow others to come in with far fewer connections to the country. So it's moving in the right direction. There will always be people, I'm sure, who are upset that they didn't get what they felt they were entitled to, but certainly the Brigade of Gurkhas and those who fight for the rights, and the Gurkha Welfare Trust who fight for the rights of soldiers and their families, are doing everything they can to make sure that we treat them with the respect and dignity that they deserve.
Beautiful. Well, speaking of ethics, going back to the publisher, this is something that I hope to God, when this pendulum swings back, I think we're in a really nasty place as far as the division and the negativity that's being kind of pumped at the moment. And that's what's beautiful about, this Bondi tragedy, is a lot of people, and this is just the algorithm that I'm part of, are focusing on the heroism, and one of that incredible man that wrestled the gun from one of the terrorist arms was a Muslim man. Okay, so then we're getting away from these pigeonholes. You've got people with mental health problems that think that they're gonna, create some jihad, and then you've got these incredible good Samaritans of all walks of life that, some of them, it cost their life. I just saw an older couple that tried to wrestle and they ended up both getting killed. So, I think that when we swing back in the business side too, I feel like where there's a lot of value now are the social businesses, whether they are giving a portion of proceeds to, some sort of charity. Well, obviously with what you're talking about, it's all going to charity, but even like a business that's set up to still make money, I think that social business model is going to be what we see next. And then comparing that with, as you just alluded to, some of the incredibly selfish nastiness that we see in some of these corporations. So putting your kind of business hat on, what is the future of business? And do you feel like now we're starting to see some of these horrendous practices, and there will be a call for more ethical businesses, and they'll be the ones that become successful?
I would like to say yes, but I don't believe it. I think there'll be, I believe, from what I read anyway, whichever the gen is, and I should be better at these gens, whatever, young adults now, whatever that is. From what I read, and again, my algorithms may present stuff that may be not fully accurate, but what I hear is that the younger sort of young adult generation now are far willing, or do practically give far more of their salary to good causes or to charity than ever before. So I think, I wouldn't say necessarily it's a pendulum swing, but it seems like there is already a sign that generationally people realize that it's gone too far one way and it's all about making money, and everyone else can go hang as long as I make my cut, and that people are willing at least a portion of their time or money or estate or whatever it may be to be given to other causes, or think about life outside their own bubble, their own Instagram group or whatever it may be. I think in terms of business though, business is business, and large corporations answer to their shareholders, and that will always be, not necessarily the excuse, that will always be the driver, that they're trying to increase the value of the business to be able to reward the shareholders, and that's just how business works. But I would like to think that there is a space where we can all support those that are doing stuff in a different way that might cost us a bit more, or it may not be as good a business to do, but if it's doing the right thing, that's valuable in itself. And I certainly would love to be able to do more in that space. I think the challenge though is that we as humans are inherently lazy. I don't want to pick an online retailer, but I hate the fact that I go to a particular online retailer all the time because stuff arrives when I need it the next day, or even the same day sometimes. I would love to walk down the local street and find a bookshop or a whatever it might be that sells those things in a similar price point and support local business, but they just don't exist now, and that's part of the problem, right? We are so used to having stuff immediately when we need it, whether that's instant gratification online with likes or clicks or whatever, or to when we receive goods and without much thought potentially about how it's got there or who might be abused on the way for it to get to me, the conditions of the people having to work to make sure it gets delivered by 10 p.m. or the next morning or whatever. So, and a bit of a long-winded answer, but I'd love to say yes, but I think business is business. But I hope that there is at least an increasing appreciation of those businesses that are trying to do things differently, whether it's for the environment or for other causes that might actually make a bigger difference.
A conversation I've been having recently, and this ties in with the book as well, that I kind of had a realization. It was actually, I always give credit. There was a guy called Said Guru on the Joe Rogan show, and they were just talking, and I forget even what the conversation was, but he was talking about, that all people are inherently good, I think was his point. And he was like, yeah, apart from, the heads of, I forget what he said, tobacco companies or something. And he goes, well, them too. And then they just moved on with the conversation. But it really stuck with me because I was like, I've never thought about that. When we talk about mental health, you and I, you're normally talking, thinking about the men and women, either side of you, the same with me. We're never talking about the people at the top of the pyramid in our organizations. But if you can sleep at night knowing that your tobacco products kill 8 million people annually around the planet, or that your opioid created the opioid crisis that we have in America that's killed millions of people to date, or your weapons that your lobbyists are trying to, help create more conflicts so you can make a lot of money, selling those, and you sleep well at night, we have a mental health problem at the, top political, CEO, etc. element as well that we are not discussing, because it should bother you if your products cost people's lives.
They will do it, they'll hold their nose and do it. Either they genuinely believe in what they're doing and they don't really care about the impact, or they will be justifying it to themselves. I would imagine that I can hold my nose for 2 years, 3 years, 5 years. The package that I'm going to be getting is worth it, and then I can do something wholesome afterwards. It's hard to, you can't obviously walk in everyone's shoes. But you mentioned opioids. I was working for a company once where we were approached by one of the biggest offenders in that space to see if we could help them be more effective in terms of how they did their business. And we looked at it and said, yeah, there's plenty of ways they could be more effective. We don't want them to be, because this is already a crisis. If we are the company that helps them sell more in a faster way to more people, that's not going to be a thing that we want to put on our headstone, the thing that we did, while we were alive at all.
Absolutely. Well, go into the book then. I kind of want to hit it chronologically as an overview, because these are conversations that I've had so many times with, especially, people in uniform. Let's talk firstly, in your conversation with Jessica, about our population in general. So a lot of people that when they hit an adult age, they're like, I want to put on a uniform, I want to serve in the military and the first responders, etc. What have been some of the conversations that you've had as far as the early lives of these men and women? Because I think that what I've seen and what I've heard from so many people is a lot of us do have struggles. Now, that doesn't mean it has to be a weakness. If it's addressed and worked through, I think it becomes resilience. I think it becomes an asset. But if it's pushed down, buried, and forgotten about, then I think it becomes a fracture in our foundation.
Yeah. Clearly the motivations vary probably culturally by country. There's lots of stereotypes about, why a US soldier is a US soldier, or why a British Army officer is a British Army officer, or who becomes a paramedic. That's clearly going to vary. But I think overall, and Jess has done the research on this, so I don't want to put words in her mouth or speak for her, but essentially from my understanding is that many who go on to serve, as you've identified, have struggled in some way or been exposed to struggle or challenge in their early years. And whether that predisposes them to be able to cope with the kind of rigors of a role of service, in service, where you are expected to put the needs of others before your own. Maybe there's something in that. I'm not sure. I certainly didn't think of this from day one. As a young child, that I wanted to be in the army. I wasn't thinking about that as a career. And even when I did choose to join, I only actually meant to join for 3 years as an experience to do good. And then I was going to get a proper job. And then, 20 whatever years later, with time having flown and learning a bunch of things, as a pilot, as well as doing a bunch of other stuff. So they taught me to do a lot of really interesting things in interesting places with interesting people. But I never thought back to at what point did I suddenly realize that service was a thing I wanted. But then when I was forced to think about it a little bit in the book, when I was writing, if I think back to those early days, just being in the choir as you were, the fact that you weren't allowed to go home until Christmas evening or Easter evening or whatever, when the rest of the school had been broken up and the school was empty of all the other kids for a couple of weeks at the end of term until you were allowed to go. From that very early age, it certainly in me inculcated that service was just something that you did. And it didn't matter that you would rather be at home. You had to do your services and you had to do your thing, and then you could go home when they were done. So maybe I'm common to many people's views of how this works or not. I don't know, but certainly I think Jess has spoken to me about those people, not just who have gone into uniform, but those who have ended up having fairly successful careers or thrived in that environment have often been found to be people that might have had more turbulent or less stable upbringings.
I think this is why it's kind of become a realization to me now. We had, our generation, obviously, we're unpacking this whole mental health conversation, I would argue, the last 10 years at best. But when you reflect back now, if we have an understanding that a lot of us have had these struggles, to have that conversation at the front door, in no way stigmatized, but just simply, if you're towing the line at the moment, there's a good chance that there are some things that led you this way. And if we can start working through them from day one, as we are going to do physical training, for example, then we can turn those into an absolute asset, a strength. You're going to be, more courageous, more empathetic, all the elements that we need in our profession. So rather than checking a box and doing a psych test, air quotes, you simply go, okay, well, of course, you probably got some stuff because you're here. So that's amazing, but you don't have to hide it, be ashamed of it, whatever. We're going to put it out in the middle of the room and we're going to start talking about it and working through it so that you can then thrive as a soldier, as a firefighter. And your proverbial basket is empty when you start, deploying overseas or, as you mentioned, going to these horrendous scenes that we respond to. So I think that the next generation of this conversation when it comes to recruitment in uniform is having that absolutely at day one. There's a good chance that you have. And that's great. I'm glad that you're here. Here's your uniform. Here's your badge. Let's start moving right from day one rather than let's not talk about it until it really rears its ugly head.
I think there's a balance to be struck, right? I think many people might not be ready to talk about it or might not even have acknowledged that there is something that is there to be talked about. I mean, there's things that I didn't, when I was writing the book, sort of think of it as a particularly cathartic experience. I didn't feel closure for anything. I just was writing what I remembered. But it came to me actually after I'd finished one of the early drafts. I was chatting to a friend about some of his early childhood trauma, and he's had a horrific experience with death and substance abuse and all sorts of other things in his family. And he talked about a recurring nightmare that he had. And it was him talking about his nightmare on a podcast that suddenly, out of nowhere, reminded me that I had a recurring nightmare when I was a kid. And I completely forgotten about it. I hadn't actively buried it or just completely forgotten that I had it. And then suddenly it became quite vivid again. So I ended up putting it in the book and jokingly say, I'm sure somebody would be able to unpick that and tell me all sorts of things about my soul, having heard the meaning of my dream, as it were. But I think the challenge is that when many people do join the military as late teens or early or uniform of any kind, police officers or emergency services, fire or medics, whatever, they might still be quite young mentally and emotionally and in life and just not ready to or know that now is the time to talk about all this stuff in huge detail. I think absolutely we need to find a way to make sure that there's no stigma attached to somebody having had challenge. Equally, I don't think we want to label people either. I think there's a big risk there that, it seems like every child has a label of some kind now. I mean, I was always referred to in my reports as being a naughty child and couldn't sit still or whatever. I mean, that's probably classic ADHD or God knows what else, but I'm glad I didn't have a label. I was just a naughty child because I was. The reasons why, one can ask my doctors, ask my teachers if they're still alive. But I think my point, I think there's a balance to be struck that we should make it clear that if you are ready to talk about some of these things, then there are mechanisms and ways to help make this a superpower rather than a vulnerability. And that, I think, is something that we need to do better at. I'm happy to say that I believe in the military now, certainly in the UK, the services on offer if somebody is struggling are far better than they ever were. The wrapper around which people can feel safe and able to get through some of the experiences they've experienced, that they've had, is far better than when I joined. I don't remember it ever really being something that we discussed until fairly late on in my career, that people might want to speak to somebody about some of the stuff they'd seen. It was sort of, for me, it was all kind of self-regulated, that I just had to remind myself that seeing an adult or a child with limbs blown off or, just in terrible trauma that those things are not normal and try not to be desensitized to it. And every time I saw it, sort of reminding myself actively to be shocked, to remind myself that I was still connected. And it would be the fact that I didn't feel emotionally upset by it would be the first trigger that I needed to go and speak to somebody. Yeah.
That's interesting. I think first, just to your point, I agree completely. I think that's when you're opening the door, those sessions don't have to be, tell me everything that happened to you. Just simply, you could talk about West Ham that hour, whatever it is. But when you've normalized it at the front door, when they are like, oh shit, I'm not sleeping well, I'm having a nightmare. And I think then they're like, well, it's an easy, well, I'll go see Steve or Allison or whoever your person is a zero barrier to entry then versus, you haven't had that address and now you're hurting and now you're already on the back foot. So I think there's a beautiful opportunity to just kind of, keep that door open when they're ready. It doesn't have to be on day one. With the desensitization, it's funny because this is pertinent to England. I went home a couple of years after 7X, especially a year after 7X, visit my dad. He had knee surgery, so I was taking care of him, getting him back to the West Country. On the plane, on the runway, getting ready to taxi to the runway, on the tarmac, and the last passenger that walked on the plane, I saw a bunch of kind of turmoil. I was looking forward, and he just basically keeled over in the aisle. So very long story, very short. Unlike you see in these news cuttings where there was a conference of cardiologists on that day or emergency physicians, there was no one from emergency medicine. So there were some great good Samaritans. The cabin crew had been trained in some of the basic stuff, but I ended up having to kind of run a code on this gentleman, and we worked him in the aisle for a while. The fire brigade got here. We managed to get them to drag him to the galley. We kept working him. Finally, London ambulance came. And then obviously they got the actual ALS treatment. And so, I then stepped back and was like, okay, you guys need anything else? And they were good. So went to the bathroom, washed the blood off my hands, and then went and took a seat. And the reason I'd say this is I sat there and it was kind of like, God, why am I feeling weird? And to your point, it's because for 14 years I dealt with that stuff, and you don't have time to think about it. You put the stuff back in the rig, you go back in service, and then boom, you're off to another call. But now you don't have your team around you. Yeah. Nothing went right because a guy keeled over in an aisle and no one had the training, and we had real problems even getting access to the equipment. It took, 5 minutes for them to get permission for each little thing that we needed. And so, you just left with this feeling of, man, that was awful. But what I realized is that's how you're supposed to feel when someone dies.
Yeah.
And it was the first time after all those years where I kind of circle around to, oh, this is the actual normal physiological response. So like you said, now we can't tap into that every single time. I mean, as you alluded to earlier, we see so much trauma that, you'd be constantly getting flooded with adrenaline, but especially in the conversation of once you transitioned out, it's like understanding that you have to get yourself back to feeling again in a way. And that's a very strange journey to have to do because you did prior to the occupation, but you can't operate if you're having an extreme reaction to each of these incidents. So you can't help but taper your response.
Yeah, I mean, for me, my emotions now, because of all the stuff I've experienced in life, are far closer to the surface. I mean, watching a sad Instagram reel or a movie, I feel it very, very keenly when I see, particularly if children get hurt or just unpleasant stuff. My emotions are very, very close to the surface. But I don't see that generally in my case, and this is where I feel extremely fortunate, that of all my military service and trauma that I experienced, that I was able to sort of, I wouldn't say bank in a way or process necessarily, but it didn't affect me in the way that fighting to be a parent and struggling with not being given access to my daughter and that kind of stuff, and feeling like the system was geared against dads particularly to get access to their child if they're trying to be good parents and stuff. That was far and away more traumatic for me than any of my military service, but I recognize it is all cumulative. So everything does leave a mark. Like that famous book, Body Keeps the Score. There's whatever you've experienced, whether it's early childhood or in your teens or 20s, there's every single thing that happens kind of niggles away. And actually one of the early titles for the book, I wanted to be, or thought it would be quite clever to call it Walking Wounded. Partly because I was technically labeled as walking wounded when I was shot, but also to make the point that all of us in life, regardless of what we do, are generally walking wounded in some way. throughout our journey, whatever the journey looks like, we're all picking up niggles here and there, mental and physical, and we just are, just keeping going and hopefully building resilience and skills as a result of those niggles as you go to be stronger for the next thing and the next thing. And I actually, not that I want to experience some of the things that I've experienced again, but I'm grateful that I have had some pretty extreme experiences, because if I hadn't, I don't think I'd be, I wouldn't say stable, but be in the place that I am, and been able to do the things that I've done. If I had less struggle or challenge throughout my life, and particularly in those early years, I might not have been nearly as resilient and able to cope with or roll with the punches that I then had to deal with, particularly where I was leading other people in a team. They look to you to be able to give them the strength and the guidance to get out of something scary and unpleasant and unfamiliar. So I'm grateful for all the struggles that I've had, because I've learned to appreciate the upsides far more, and I feel that I am genuinely far more resilient for having struggled and failed multiple times at multiple things, because that's how you learn.
When I look back and hear, stories from men and women in the fire service who have been at that darkest point, they're there with the pistol, whatever their method of execution, self-execution was going to be. And thank God, a dog, a phone call, whatever it was to stop them. And I look back and go, well, why didn't I get to that point? And even though when I was 4, I was in a house fire, and my parents had a horrific divorce, and we had another near-death experience in Wales, and all these things that you could look back and go, well, these were significant traumas. I also grew up on a farm. My dad was a horse vet. He was healing animals. I had real food, lots of activity, time in nature, community. I was, one of 5 kids. So a lot of these elements that we know are healing simultaneously now. When you reflect back, knowing that there are, men in your unit that also got to that dark place that we lost, what were some of the elements of your life thus far you think that countered these trauma to allow you to, to process them and become a strength and resilience?
I don't know. It's a great question. It's a tough one though, because everybody's different, right? The brain is annoyingly unique for everybody. It's a slightly different way that we process everything. So I can safely say that at no point ever in my life have I ever considered ending my life. I've never got to that point. And I hope that I never would. I've had some pretty dark points where I just couldn't see a way through financially, let's say, or just with the things that I was trying to juggle, like how can I process all of these things and still be able to function? I've been in those places. But I've never sort of thought about why I would ever, move to the ultimate sort of cry for help, I suppose. But you mentioned dog. For me, having my dog, who sadly passed away in the summer after over 17 years, we're very, very lucky. She was amazing. I mean, she was with me through all of the really crappiest parts of sort of recent life. And I grew up in a household that we had animals all over the place all the time, whether it was hamsters or fish or rabbits or dogs or whatever. And the dogs that we grew up with generally were rescue Great Danes. I mean, Great Danes are ridiculous anyway. They're so bloody huge. And their hearts are so small for such a large animal. So even on a good run, you're probably looking at 8 years average for a Great Dane. But with rescues, we would sometimes have 5 years, maybe 6 if we were lucky. So we kind of learnt the circle of life quite early on. And then when I got Maya, who was a German short-haired pointer, I was told that they generally live to 12 to 14. I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. I've never had a dog beyond 8. This is awesome. And then, she had a few struggles in her life, but yeah, we finally lost her in the summer, age 17 years, 2 months. But she lived with me in Australia when I was out there trying to be closer to my daughter. She lived with me in the States. She never quite got over the steering wheel being on the wrong side of the car. So she would normally sit in the front with me. And when I picked her up from Dulles Airport one time, she jumped straight into what would have been the passenger seat at home in the UK and sort of goes, right, where are we going? It's like, honey, unless you've learned to drive, you're going to have to. But we did everything together. She was absolutely a sidekick. So for me, having an animal or having even if you're on your own, just having something there that wants you to go and do something with them. When you thought, I just can't get out of bed. I don't know quite what to do today. I just can't face it. And then this happy creature comes up and says, come on, let's go for a walk. This will be amazing. And then you go back, life's all right. So for me, just having something, and I was very lucky as well in that time, I talk about it in the book a bit, that particularly when I was in Australia, obviously completely the wrong time zone for when most of my friends were back in the UK and Europe. And there were certain friends who weren't necessarily the closest friends that I had on whom I was sort of expecting to rely. They were the people who I didn't necessarily know as well, who wouldn't take no for an answer if I just stopped responding to texts or wouldn't answer calls. They just kept going until I did. And then that was really enlightening, I suppose, for me, that it wasn't necessarily the people I expected to be there who were there. And that gave me a reason to think about how I interact with others, that I don't have, you don't have to know somebody super well. And in fact, in some cases, it may be better if you don't know somebody super well, that you can provide that emotional support or just the ear to hear how they might be struggling or getting through something challenging, particularly when, if they don't come from a world like ours of service and trauma, if something tragic has happened to them in a arguably normal life, normal job, normal sort of existence, their friends and family may really struggle to know what to say and how to say it. And I had this actually very recently with somebody who's a customer actually at work on the counter drone side, and we were working with him, and then he shared that he just lost his son, as a late teen child suddenly, and clearly appalling, to have to have your kids predecease you. And so I shared a copy of the book and just said, I'm here to listen. And seemingly that was sort of all that was needed to give him something to, and he opened up. And now, we've got a very different relationship because he was willing to be vulnerable and I was willing to listen. And I've experienced this myself, with a lot of friends and family, or friends or any colleagues who've been involved in trauma or loss. And there is a sort of, what do I say? I don't want to say something wrong, so I won't say anything. But actually, it's just saying something and just knowing that somebody is there to listen and gets it, maybe all that you need. So I'm trying to do better and try and make sure that I've got more time for people that don't necessarily count as close friends, but if I can help or the book can help people, then that'd be amazing.
Well, speaking of dogs, I had a German Shepherd, Nini, who, again, was there right at the beginning of my divorce all the way through till, I think we lost her 3 years ago now. And she was everything, 100%. And I was very fortunate. My mum had had German Shepherds since I was little, and she always kind of overlapped. So when one got kind of middle-aged, she got another one, because I thought they lived longer, but actually they only lived for about 10 years, and that's when I lost mine. And the downside, obviously, of having such an incredible companion is when you do finally lose them. So how did you deal with the grief of an incredible companion that he leaned on so much, the last 17 years?
Well, like I said, we grew up with learning the circle of life pretty rapidly. We lost hamsters probably every 10 minutes. It's just we got through a lot of animals for all sorts of reasons. And I just got really out of the habit. So, I think the thing that helped me was just reminding myself constantly how lucky we were to have had so much time. Every day, every month extra was a blessing, really, from when I was told you could expect 12 to 14 years. I mean, she had, how old would she have been? Just after I arrived in America in 2017, maybe, with her. She had a cancerous tumor that was identified, which caused all sorts of dramas with the insurance company. I had to prove that I didn't know about it before I took the policy out, because it literally happened a couple of weeks after we arrived. And I got the gold-plated insurance because I was terrified about the cost of medical care in America. And I thought, oh God, because she was always hurting herself, running around like a lunatic, ripping stuff open and tearing her ears and God knows what. And so when this cancerous tumor was found, I was like, oh my God, I can't cope. So I got the gold-plated insurance that probably included manicures and pedicures and massage and God knows what. Anyway, so she'd gone through a few things, and during COVID, we thought we might lose her at one point. She had they call it a vestibular accident, which is basically a blood flow issue between the brain and the balance, and she kept falling over and just wasn't very well. But she got through that, and she sort of had lots of things once and then just kept going. So as tragic as it was to finally lose her, I think I just had to be, just as I said, remind myself that how lucky we were to have had so much time, and she was such an amazing, amazing dog that it was just a blessing. She's in a tube in my office on the shelf, so she's still with us as we speak. But the hardest thing was that when they finally worked out why she wasn't getting better, she had this stupid habit of jumping off the last few steps on the stairs, and that was fine if it was a grippy floor. But one time she did it, a couple of months before she died, and her legs just went, out sideways, and she must have ripped something. I don't know, something horrible happened, and she didn't really ever recover. She suddenly looked old when she wasn't bouncing around like a puppy, like everyone thought she was. And then she just had upset stomach constantly, and eventually we took her to the vet and said, look, she's not getting better. We've put her a muzzle on her so she can't eat anything horrible on walks, so it can't be that. And they basically did a scan and said, oh my God, the reason she's off her food is because there's so much cancer around her in her stomach cavity that there's no room. So she's not eating because it must be so painful for her to eat. So made the decision pretty much not there and then, but within an hour. And then they said, bring her in tomorrow morning at I think it was 11:40 was the first appointment. That was the hardest bit. That was really, really tough, knowing that we had this clock ticking, and that this would be her last walk, her last this, her last meal. So that was tough. But she had a really good one of her best sort of peaceful final nights, because she'd had some pretty unpleasant nights of being quite ill. So it happened as best as it possibly could have given the circumstances. So we're very lucky, and just trying to identify now the new baby mama of the whoever comes next, and hopefully have a dog who's going to be equally loving and kind, and want to go running and do all the fun things that I used to enjoy doing as a little gang.
Beautiful. Yeah, I kenneled mine. She actually passed away in the kennel, but she was acting a little off, but nothing that was too alarming. But my wife was in med school down in Miami, so 300 miles away. So I would kennel her for the weekend, go visit my wife every other week, and then come back. And the way that she looked at me, retrospectively, I think she knew. And my puppy was with her as well, so she wasn't alone. The kennel people are amazing, but
yeah.
I've had that seared in my mind, the way that she looked back at me that last time. I'd probably get choked up even talking about it now. So yeah, but like you said, though, all those years, all that companionship, all that unconditional love. I mean, that's what you got to reflect on. And she's sitting on the table in my living room, so she's still with us too.
Good.
All right. Well, another area that you do a good job, kind of, I think traversing in the book. And by the way, I love the fact that you did this, because you have that whole quiet, silent professional element in a lot of your professions, but there's so much value in story. And obviously there's a difference between storytelling and narcissism, and I killed all these people single-handedly like Rambo. But I think our professions can do a lot of good in the world if you couple some stories from your experience and give the average person a view through your eyes, but then layer it with takeaways. That's what I did with my first book. And I think you've done such a good job here. But in our professions, and also outside our professions, I realized that a lot of times we talk about mental health challenges, and we do this because you're hurting and we need to heal you. But there's such a chasm between that and where I'm sure the teams that you work with have the psychologists helping as well, which is high level performance. In my profession, we're still stuck at, well, these firefighters keep dying or taking their own lives or overdosing or drowning in alcohol. How do we stop that happening? But on the other side of that is, high level performance. How can you traverse 20 floors in the Grenfell Tower and then have the clear mind and get into a flow state to try and do a primary search as everything's burning around you?
Yeah.
So talk to me about that. We have these conversations about mental health, but I think that same exact conversation factors into, the mental high performance.
Yeah, I mean, my experiences were, I suppose, of their generation. I'm not a youngster. And at the time where I was doing many of these things, whether it was international sport or, which clearly is very, very psychological now in terms of, every major sports team or international team would have a team of psychologists that are helping people think about how to process what's going on around them to continue to be in their flow state, performing at the very top all the way through the game or the race or whatever. None of that was there in any of the periods that I was doing this stuff. It was always kind of, we were making it up as we went along, really. And that's not saying that's good. So I'm glad to know that there are better facilities and services available to people to think about things that might help them to be more high performing in the moment, but also to think about how they would process those activities or actions after the fact. That just wasn't a thing for us. So I never honestly, genuinely thought about it as mental health wasn't a term then either. It was probably too far the other way. It was just sort of get on with it. Clearly, if somebody was really struggling, then we had a duty of care to make sure that we tried to get them to speak to somebody. But there weren't very many. I wouldn't have known necessarily where to go to get them the help that they might need. And if you get that wrong first touch with the system to help somebody who might be struggling in whichever way, then that could be the only thing they need to turn them off to the whole process about ever talking about it again, which could be the start of the spiral. So I'm not best informed to be able to say how it's done today across the military or fire service or police, but don't think that the fire service is still decades behind. Even if we are slightly ahead as a military collectively globally, we're not as far ahead as perhaps you might think. And it's often the people that you would never expect who are the ones that aren't able to cope, and that's the thing that's so frustrating, is that it's so hard to predict and identify who the people might be that might actually be the ones who could go to the point of ending their own lives or dying by suicide because they can't cope or don't feel that there's any point in continuing. It's not necessarily the people that you would associate visually or from even what they say, and that's the biggest challenge, which is why having professionals who know what to look for is so critical. But when I think back to the high performing stuff, I talk about it in the book. You might remember, went to the World Championships and I had no training and no preparation because I didn't get the letter that selected me for the Great Britain team, which was ridiculous because the army lost the letter. And I turned up at the World Championships on the start line, and I've never been as relaxed in my life for a race, the biggest race of my life. And I was so chilled because I thought, I haven't had breakfast. I was drinking last night because it was a thing that I needed to go to. I've had no sleep. I've done no training. What could possibly go wrong? And I had the race of my life because I'd given myself an excuse not to put the pressure on that I would normally have put on myself to perform, even though I never had any real training in that sport. I was just sort of just seeing if I could do it, and randomly found myself on the start line of the World Championships, which is a bit stupid. So I think, again, it goes back to the brain being different. I think it's hard to put a one size fits all, but I'm glad to know that for those who are in professions where the chronic level of stress or requirement to make the right decision every time, because you don't get a second chance in the heat of a fire or a shooting or a gun battle or a sporting race, that there are mechanisms in place to make sure that we understand at least that thinking about and supporting people in processing the kind of activities that they're about to embark on and train them as much as you can to be ready to be able to cope with them is now a thing, because it certainly wasn't when I was a youngster.
Well, I think what's beautiful about it is it's a two-pronged conversation. So if you, especially when you have the guys that still buy into the mental health side as weakness and all that kind of thing, which I think is getting less and less as we progress through now. But if you focus on the high performance side, the tools are pretty much the same. I had a baseball player on, Logan Gelbrick, a few years ago, and he was talking about a flow state moment that he had in a game. And he's also a kind of sports scientist as well. And he was saying you need three things to get into a flow state. You need, the number of reps, the repetitions, so you're actually are good at that skill. You need a high stress environment, which for him was a baseball game. For us is obviously what we did. And then you said you need a calm mind. And that's the ding, 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 ding. So if you are looking at being in a flow state or trying to chase at least the flow state in, a gun battle, in a firefight, in a building, then a lot of the modalities are the same. If you are doing meditation, if you are, speaking to a counselor, if that's something that you need to do, if you are doing, breath work or ice baths or whatever these things are that you're using as a tool, you can forge performance. But the beautiful unspoken side effect is also you're positively affecting your mental health. So I think that, the fact that you can positively move the needle on both of these adds a lot more weight to, not the argument's the wrong word, but it opens people's eyes and destigmatizes this to, you're broken, we got to help you fix, and takes it into, no. We want you to be a better soldier, a better firefighter. And I think the fact that you can message it that way and have the side effects that are positively affecting the mental health is maybe the future conversation of this whole thing.
Well, one of the sponsors or patrons of the book actually is an organization called Peak State Mental Fitness. And for them, which I buy into completely, they talk a lot about flow state in their work, but it's about the brain is a muscle, or think of it as a muscle like any other muscle. You have to train it and exercise it and test it and repeat, rinse, repeat. And so thinking about being mentally fit rather than mental health per se, I think for certainly high performers is the way that I like to think about it. That we can train ourselves with exercises or exposure to the kinds of things that we're going to need to get comfortable in. And for me, generally, given that we always used to joke in the military that no plan survives contact with the enemy. You can have the best plan in the world, and as Mike Tyson used to say, everyone has a plan until you're punched in the face. So accepting that up front in any situation you go into, that yes, plan and train ready for the event, but also be equally ready that when things don't go to plan, you've also thought about some of the contingencies that are most likely, so that you don't go, oh my God, what to do now? Because you've thought about, if in the event of this happening, and we used to do it all the time, in the event of vehicle breakdown or helicopter crash or whatever it might be, number of casualties, what would we do to either continue to achieve the mission or save the lives of those that might be impacted? And the same in a race or anything else. I think for me, that fitness piece is key. And you talk about calm mind. I mean, maybe for the wrong reasons, but on that start line of that World Championships I could not have been calmer, because it was so alien to me. And I just thought the whole thing was so ridiculous that there was no point being stressed, because there was no more control. There was no control to be had. It was just enjoy it, be proud that you're wearing your nation's colors. And I just basically hung on the back of this guy, another Brit, who I think ended up getting a silver medal on that first 10-kilometer run. I just tried to hang on to him, for that 10 kilometers. It was far faster than I was ever able or willing to go. I got a personal best on the run alone. I just thought, I just got to keep going until I either die or someone tells me to stop, and it all worked out.
Well, going back to our earlier conversation, I mean, I think the perfect example of the detrimental element of a busy, overworked, tired mind is what we saw in COVID. And I mean, actually, the conversation, it was, 2 World War I trenches. You were either pro-vaccines, masks, or you were anti-everything. It was Chinese conspiracy. And it was almost an inability to stand in the middle and go, well, wait a second. This is definitely obviously a real thing. Wherever it came from, it's a real virus. But the health of the individual seems to dictate your ability to overcome this or not. So why don't we just talk about making everyone healthier? Let's get them outside. Let's get them exercising. Let's get them, being around people, even if you can, do it outside, because you don't want to fracture relationships. We know that's detrimental to the human health as well. But there was an inability to critically think. And whether it's at a macro level during a pandemic, or whether it's a micro level during a firefight, or looking for a child in a burning building, it still alludes to the fact that if you can work on yourself and do whatever it takes to get that mind calmer and clearer, not only will you operate at a high level, but even just, in these national conversations, you'll be able to stand in the middle again and critically think and go, does that make sense? Is that kind? Is that benefiting the people of my nation?
Society. Yeah. And that's what I thought about the mask stuff. But I didn't always wear masks, but I did when I was in situations where we were in confined spaces or on an airplane or on the tube or whatever. And whether I thought it was going to stop me getting sick or not, if it was going to likely potentially protect others, because I might have come into contact with somebody that I didn't know had the disease, and there might be an elderly person on the tube, then I felt it was my duty to do anything that I could that might reduce the risk. It may not ameliorate the risk entirely. And I remember when this debate became so aggressive, didn't it, between all the different sides. And there was one that I did like a cartoon once, trying to explain to people who were refusing to accept that masks could do anything. And it had different cartoons of people peeing on each other. And it had, so somebody had a mask, then the pee went back on themselves. It didn't go out to the other person. It was just showing that it's going to do something if it's not going, if you can prevent your germs going one way or the other. And then the other thing that amused me during COVID was the way different countries referenced the distance that one should keep between each other for safety. And I think it was in Sweden, they had signs that had a moose or an elk as the thing that people should think about, right? Stay 1 moose away from the next person. They were saying 2 meters, that some people go, what's 2 meters look like? They're like, just stay an elk or a moose apart from someone else.
Yeah, it was. I mean, again, reflecting back now, and this is what's sad too. I don't know if we had this in the first conversation, but where I feel there was a massive disservice is the decisions that were made, and what happened, and we saw, there were hot spots where absolutely this virus was creating a lot of death, especially again with people with comorbidities, and there were other sides, like I had Tom Beaver from BeaverFit, where they built a massive morgue in London and it was completely unused, and
Yeah,
they built it, which is amazing. So, but what really pissed me off is after the fact, after we saw, the real elements, after we saw politicians having Christmas parties while the British are being told to stay in their homes, there was no retroactive, after action report on, okay, what did we do well? What did we do poorly? Do we need to look at the nation's health? And that is where we did the massive disservice, I think, is that we need to learn from those events. So the next time, because it will happen, how we react differently, how can we make the nation healthier? And
yeah.
certainly here in the US, that was a zero conversation. In fact, we're just getting fatter and sicker.
Yeah, I mean, I think that inquiry is maybe still going on, or maybe it concluded recently. But we're not great as a nation and as a society, probably globally, of really learning the lessons. We are quite quick to identify lessons, but whether we actually learn them or want to learn them, particularly if we learned the lesson and then did something about it to make sure it didn't happen again, if it's going to be too expensive or too difficult or too disruptive, then they just don't do it. So it's always slightly depressing when you read these reports and you go, some of this stuff is so obvious. Why did it take 3 years to agree that that was just a stupid thing to do or not do? Anyway, but what from what you read in the book, what were the things that connected most with you personally? What did you find resonated or surprised?
I mean, honestly, it's what resonated with me was, again, this reinforcing of a lot of things that we talked about for several years now. And then again, with different people, different perspectives, different stories, to connect them, like community, for example. So this was really going to hit next. In our profession, you have a lot of people that, selflessly serve. They're proud to be, in part of this unit. You're obviously in a very elite unit. So you have that cohesion, you have that close tribe, you have that sense of purpose. I am doing something, hopefully, that's going to make the world a little bit better. But then you transition out. And I think that's where we see a lot of our veterans, a lot of our first responders struggling. And so the overarching lesson, I think the community element is everything. But talk to me about that. We develop such a cohesive unit in a lot of these groups, but then one day you leave, your ID doesn't work, you're not wearing the uniform anymore, and you find yourself in a flat. Maybe your family unit can dissolve. So I think that's one of the most important things for people listening, because it doesn't matter whether you wear a uniform or not. They've shown that not only mental health but physical health, the relationship side is one of the most important things for mental and physical longevity, and that is something that's so fractured so acutely in the uniform professions.
Yeah, I think the community thing, I finish, as I said in the book at the end, with the power of community, because it is so important. I think, particularly not just for those who've served in uniform, but for anybody. We are designed to be parts of communities or tribes and storytell and be part of something. And I think that's the challenge if people find themselves in situations post-service or just in life generally alone or isolated. And clearly COVID did highlight that for a lot of people, how difficult that can be if you are actively cut off from those interactions that maybe all you need. It may be that you just go down to your coffee shop once a day and just the act of saying hello and somebody asking how you are and you just having a bit of a chit chat while you buy your coffee, that may be that all you need, and your community is that cafe. Or it might be your sports team or your music group, your band or your veteran group or your firefighter group, or a mixture of all these things. I think trying to find ways and for us to have ways to include people in groups easily so that they feel like they are part of something. It doesn't really matter what the thing is, honestly. I think just feeling like you're part of something where you have a safe place to go. For some people it'd be a church or a synagogue or a mosque. It doesn't really matter, but I get that people need to feel connected. That's just how we're wired. For me, in terms of the transition, just to touch on that, and we may have, I think we talked about this a little bit last time we were on together, but I think part of this process is, again, almost training yourself to understand what is going to happen in advance of it happening. So many of the stories where a transition hasn't worked very well for somebody seems to be where they've been in the tribe, and now they're not. And suddenly it's all new and it's scary and it's daunting, and there isn't that support network and the friendship group because you've gone back, because you might have money and you've gone back to live with your parents, or something may have happened that you find yourself suddenly in a very different circumstance. I think if we can help people, and I know this work is ongoing across many different professions to try and prepare people better for the next phase of their life, because let's face it, many of us are still very young and we've got more time to serve in other roles in life than the time we spent in uniform, if we're healthy. And so for me, I didn't necessarily actively think about this too much, but I did consciously make a decision that I wasn't actively transitioning from one tribe to another, because there were plenty of things that transcended whether I was in uniform or not. My way of thinking about life and where I could add value commercially or otherwise was that if I can find myself continuing to do interesting things with interesting people in interesting places, that's the continuity. And it doesn't matter whether I'm in uniform or out of uniform, in a government job or in a commercial job, as long as I've got that balance of always finding something that I can do with people that I trust, who are all pulling in the same direction as a team. It didn't matter if it's a big team or a small team, a startup or a big corporate. You've just got to find your groove with people that are like-minded, and in my case, service-focused or mission-focused, and not self-serving, narcissistic types that doing something for the greater good. For me, that's what purpose is all about. And as long as we can find elements of that in the transitional phase, then I think most people would actually find that life is not quite as scary as perhaps they think, or find it if they haven't, thought about it in advance about where they might end up.
Just for people listening, that's not an attack drone that's flying around Ash's head. That's just the construction workers a couple of floors down. I just realized.
Apple might do a better job of getting rid of the drilling that's going on. Yeah, apologies.
No, you're fine. What I realize as well is when we lean too heavily into the identity. I was a soldier, I was a firefighter, and then one day you're in the supermarket and no one cares what you did. You're just a bloke in line, with some hobnobs in your hand. It made me realize that if you take a step back, going back to what we talked about early life, why you're driven to serve, that's who you are. That's your purpose, is that you wanted to be there when people were having a bad day. You wanted to be there to be the protector. And some of us found first responders, military units to be a part of that. But that was just the unit, the uniform that we put on for that moment. But if you carry on that purpose, as you have obviously with your charity work and some of the other things that you've done, a lot of people that then transition out and, whether you're a personal trainer or you become a physician or whatever it is, but you carrying on that service element, it seems to be a much less jarring transition. But I find that the people that then transition out and go to, as you talked about, one of those less altruistic groups, maybe you find yourself in finance or something, and now you're just being told money is the most important thing. Yeah. I feel that's usually a mismatch for a lot of people that did serve.
100%. So, yeah. I mean, I remember when I was looking at what sectors I might want to work in, and people saying, have you thought about financial services? And I thought, oh yeah, I could do that. I feel like I don't have any specific skills, but I've got enough skills that I can turn my hand to many different things. There wasn't anything that was particularly, didn't jump out as that's the job I want. I want to be a this or a that. So I thought, yeah, financial services, I could do that. And then the more I thought about it, it's like, that's just not me. Yes, it'd be lovely to earn ridiculous sums of money, and that's life-changing in all sorts of ways. But I have worked for some companies where just the culture wasn't a good fit, and I've been paid better there than I have in other places, but I just couldn't stay. There were some brilliant people and people I loved there, but just generally the culture was just not quite right. And I think the other worry that a lot of people have is that if they make the wrong decision and join the wrong thing, that's it, because many joined uniform service or non-uniform service, but service generally. And you consider it as a career quite often. I mean, I said I didn't mean to, but it ended up being such. There's a sort of misconception that you can't just say, once you're in the civilian sector, okay, well, I didn't like that, I'm going to move on to something else. We are very free to actually find the tribe and the vibe that gels with us. The challenge for many people, and I try and explain this to anybody who's asking me for advice when they're leaving, it's like, don't worry about getting a job. That's not the problem. Finding one that you really feel is valuable, though you're giving back or you're making a difference in a way that you earn enough to be comfortable. But for people for whom the salary is not everything, but there are far more other motivators that actually matter more to you with your integrity and your morals and the way you are. That's the hard thing, is to find that tribe. And I've been actively recruiting folks for my team, some of whom worked with me in the past or in and out of uniform, but different roles. And now we've got to a point where we've got an incredibly powerful core team that I trust. And it always comes down to trust, honestly, where I can trust them to do the right thing, whether I'm there or not, trust them to make the right judgment calls, to take opportunities when they present themselves and do the right thing. And that in itself is so liberating, to be bringing good people in and empowering them. And if we can create a culture of trust and respect, and then that's all that we need as a gang to hopefully succeed and make a difference in the world. And I think it saddens me when there are so many people who clearly haven't either been able to speak to people in advance of the transition and therefore struggled, or don't know where to turn to get that support network. I'm actually speaking to a group tomorrow night that a veteran reached out to me a few weeks ago and asked if I'd speak to a group of people that he speaks to once a month about resilience. So, anything that can help people just hear a different perspective, it may be all that's required, and not related to the book, but I remember doing a speech once somewhere, and this lady came up to me afterwards, and I talked about some of the challenges I'd experienced and got through. And she said, I just wanted to say thank you. And she rested her hand on my arm and said, thank you for what? She goes, I thought my life was shit, but you really have gone through it. And so for her, it was like, okay, well, if I've brought you some perspective, then you're welcome. It was quite funny. So I'm hoping that's what we can do with the book, is just give people ideas and realize that they're not on their own, that we are kind of all in it together. And, there have been many others that have gone before them that have been struggling equally. And there is always a way through. It may be hard to see initially, but there is always a way through. And if we can help people find that path, then that's great.
One more area before we go to some closing questions, I'll be mindful of your time, that is really under discussed, again, when you're talking about high performing teams especially, but even at a detrimental level, is the moral injury of organizational betrayal. So you are a passionate firefighter, you trained, you've done all your education, you come in, you're now part of the station, and the way that it's run is not service oriented. They're not focusing on their people. They're not creating an environment that allows these men and women to thrive. It's quite corrosive and toxic, and that can be very, very jarring for a first responder. It can be jarring for a military member if maybe they learn that where they were sent under that pretense was actually falsified. What are you seeing as far as that, just overall, the negative impact of a group of people that really are there for the right reasons if there's poor leadership or toxic environment?
Yeah, it's really tough. One of the modules that I teach often if I'm doing leadership seminars and stuff is managing up. How can you try and help if you've got the experience or you can see what is not being done well? It may not necessarily be deliberate or designed to hurt or be negatively impacting of people, but if you can see behaviors or issues happening above you that you might be able to help, then we also have a duty as good followers to try and have a conversation and explain to those individuals what it is that we value from them in leadership, and those things that might be less welcome or are not actually helping the team achieve their thing. But that's tough. It's a really hard space to be, particularly if those who are in those leadership roles are not willing to listen and be corrected or be challenged. I get things wrong all the time, but I am always open to be corrected or challenged if there's something that I'm doing, and encourage my team to always talk to me if they think that I've done something wrong or said something wrong or could do something in a better way that could help be more inclusive or help people get through something in a more positive way. I think, again, this goes back to what we discussed earlier about what are the motivators of those leaders. And if there may be pressures that we're not seeing, and we have to therefore give them a little bit, potentially a little bit more credit if there are things that we're not cited to, but try and encourage them to share what their pressures might be. Because I think with the way the world's going with lots of 360 reporting and stuff, we are trying to encourage more of a self-awareness culture, particularly as leaders, to know how we come across, and what we think we may be doing for the right reasons may not be perceived in the same way for those below us. But if there's clearly illegal, toxic, or deliberately untrustworthy behavior, then that's more of a moral issue. And I think the moral quotient is something that must be well understood and not tolerated by the organization writ large. If bad behavior happens, if people are disrespected, abused, then that must not be tolerated. And every leader I speak to, where they have experienced this, either as leaders in an organization where other subordinates have behaved like this, or whether they've been part of the issue, they all to a person said they wish they'd acted faster, because it's cancerous. This kind of negativity and toxicity, if it is not addressed, will either worst case be seen by everybody as being acceptable, and that can lose the trust of everybody of your organization, and that's clearly very damaging. Or it can just negatively impact the day-to-day, and people won't perform or won't want to do the job or go the extra mile, which we need everyone to do.
Absolutely. I think where I struggle is almost moral courage. It's that doing something because it's the right thing to do. So I'll give you a perfect example. You're a fire chief here, locally, and you work 40 hours, 9 to 5, go to bed, you go to home, go to bed with your own family. And the people that actually running the shifts are working 56 hours a week, because of mismanagement. Now you've got vacancies. So now you're filling these vacancies with forced overtime. So now these men and women are working 80 hours. I struggle to understand why you don't have the courage to advocate for those people, to get more staff, to improve recruiting, do the things that are actionable that you know about, but you are okay because you're okay. You go home at 5 o'clock, so I'm good. And it takes moral courage to say, look, just because I'm okay, my people aren't at the moment. I'm having these suicides. I'm having, locally firefighters arrested in this particular case. And no heads are being turned, no questions are being asked. So I think that is so detrimental when people under you are not seeing you fight for them.
Or being willing to fill in. I mean, if there are gaps, if you as the chief aren't willing to maybe roll your sleeves up and take a turn on the ladder, even to do something. We used to have a general in Iraq he wanted to understand what the stresses and strains were of the troops in combat. So he would routinely, weekly, go out on missions as a junior soldier, albeit as a starred general officer, just to experience what are the challenges and stresses and difficulties of operating in an environment where we're constantly being told you've got to reduce collateral damage, no accidental death is acceptable. Him then seeing it up close and personal about the challenges of the not being able to see because of smoke and whatever, dust or anything else, and everything just going in chaos. So he could better appreciate the challenges we face. So he could advocate to say they did everything they could, and I know that their processes are always designed to minimize collateral, but there will occasionally in the fog of war be incidents that are unavoidable because it is just really hard. So I'm not saying that fire chiefs are even allowed to go and do shifts, but certainly if I knew that team members were having to do double shifts or a detriment to their families doing extra work that was starting to break them, then I wouldn't be able to sleep at night personally if I knew that they knew that I was doing a 40-hour week and getting plenty of 8-hour REM sleep, whatever else.
Yeah, I agree completely. All right. Well, then with that, the first question I love to ask, is there a book or are there books that you love to recommend? We'll get to obviously to yours where people can find that, but other things that people have written.
I mean, there's so many. It's hot. And I was asked to do a reading list actually as part of the book process, that if people wanted a reading list from me that they could get. It's quite long though, so I don't know. Do you want fiction, non-fiction? What's your thing?
Whatever you want. Anything that pops to mind.
Let me think of one that I've read recently that I loved. You put me right on the spot here. You could have given me some warning. I'm not going to answer very intelligently at all. I don't want to just say things that sound clever because I don't necessarily always read clever. I read stuff that I enjoy. I do like lots of non-fiction stuff, not necessarily memoirs, but I like reading stories of particularly resilience. I get one that's just sprung to mind, Unbroken. I know there was a movie about this, but reading the book, and I'd seen the movie and it was like, yeah. And then I read the book and it just blew me away. Just hearing particularly stories of resilience and the amount of time that these people had to endure the things that they endured in the Second World War, for example, are just beyond anything that we could comprehend today. I think, the wars or the incidents that we fight, even the things that firefighters and first responders go and resolve, generally they don't last more than a few hours. They might be incredibly traumatic, not diminishing that at all, but these aren't months or even years in some cases of torture and abuse and just chronic, appalling suffering. So when I read those kind of things, for me, they're really good reminders and levelers that there are many people who've gone through far more than we have. And therefore, I sort of feel like we owe it to them to not be not too precious is the wrong word, but just respect the fact that there are others that have served and done far more incredibly heroic things to give us the lives that we have now, and we sort of therefore should try and carry that forward for the generation after us. So Unbroken is probably a good one to suggest.
Brilliant. Yeah, I think that's it. I mean, when we look, World War II was only 80 years ago. So what did that generation think about what we're doing with the freedom that they truly fought for? We talk about in America, fighting for freedom, but a lot of those wars were in the Middle East, but in Europe, the UK easily could be speaking German now and could be under a fascist regime. So 2 short generations later, what are we doing as far as gratitude and community in response to all of that selfless service and lives lost in World War II?
Yeah, I mean, great comments. I think arguably not enough. I think that we have to think, though, sensibly about what actually are the communities that we need to be supporting today, because, as you said, Second World War 80 years ago, First World War, very few left at all from that generation. People still think, when you say veterans, certainly in the UK, people still think of the Chelsea pensioners in the red coats, with their medals going down King's Road in London, or World War II veterans in wheelchairs with bemedaled chests and large berets and everything else. Actually, there's a much bigger generation that has seen more recent trauma and challenge that we've got to find a way of recognizing that there are those who continue to serve. But I think we might have mentioned this last time I was on, but very keen that we don't turn this into a negative thing where people think service is going to cause you to break. I think we have to recognize, certainly in the UK, where I work with more charities than anywhere else, the percentage of those that need care and support is a small percentage compared to the vast majority who go on to have extremely successful, thriving, high-performing lives, careers, and jobs in their sort of second phase, as it were, once they retire. So while we want to give the very best care that we can for those who need it across all the uniformed and non-uniformed services, we also should shine a light on the fact that serving in whichever way is your way to serve, whether it's volunteering or working in a pet shelter, but doing things for others, is what we must try and encourage the next generation to fight for and recognize the value of. Because certainly when people talk about having purpose or not feeling that they have purpose, it generally links back to not having or having something that is bigger than themselves. And I think we need to encourage and continue to encourage, from a very early age, that go back to one of those very early comments that you mentioned about when we are born and what we do and how we view the world. We've got to just bring that back as a core part of who we are as Western civilized societies, I think.
100%. Well, we talked about books. What about film, television, documentaries? Any of those that you like?
Films, I can never remember the films that I've watched, because I don't really watch films quite often, very often. But if I do, it's often because I've got to stay up for 8 hours on a night when I'm supposed to be sleeping, but I'm on a plane to go to a new time zone. So I might watch 4 movies back to back just to stay awake. And then some of them I might enjoy, some of them are very forgettable. And then I'll speak to friends and they'll say, "Oh, what did you watch?" "Oh, I watched one brilliant movie." "What was it called?" "No idea." They go in and out. So do more of the kind of the box sets at the moment. COVID was very much all the Narcos. I did all of those. I suppose some of the ones that I've really enjoyed recently, Black Doves. Have you watched that?
I haven't heard of that one, no.
It's a
Okay.
British series, basically some assassins. Keira Knightley's a middle-aged mum who happens to be an assassin, but her cover is that she's a middle-aged mum with kids, and it's a very funny script. You'll I'm sure you'll enjoy it. The weird thing that don't want to spoil it, but the thing that really freaked me out when I realized halfway through is that the guy who plays her assassin partner, he is the voice of Paddington, the movie. So when you're watching this guy do his sort of, his hit jobs, you're thinking, Paddington and Mr. Brown and all that sort of stuff is a bit weird. So Black Doves is a recommendation. Just finished all the Yellowstones. I kind of binge watch stuff just to kind of, before bed, just watch something. I'm not sure what's next on the calendar. I've never seen Game of Thrones. People tell me I really missed out there, so maybe I should do that at some point.
We're just watching Yellowstone now, and it's funny when you talk about Paddington. I can just see him standing over a body with a gun in his hand, eating a marmalade sandwich.
Yeah, it's very weird. It's a good one. It's a good one.
All right. Well, the next question: is there a person you'd recommend to come on this podcast as a guest to speak to the first responders, military, and associated professions of the world?
Yes. When you're talking about fire chief and toxicity and the challenge of trying to do the right thing for your people, there is a former colleague of mine who was in the Royal Marines in the UK, very, very talented officer. He left earlier than he should have done, probably. Would certainly have been a general if he'd remained. And he went into public sector and did a lot of work in fire and particularly in fire, where he was trying to turn around various issues that were happening in a particular area. So I think he would resonate with some of the things that you've highlighted. So I'll definitely connect you with him. Ollie Lee is his name.
Brilliant. Thank you. And then also, I don't know if she would be interested, but I think getting Jessica on to talk about the book would be another good one.
Oh yeah, no, Jess loves to, would love all this. And she's, like I said, her background is very much policing and emergency services. And she's worked with the Royal Foundation of Royal Highnesses, Prince and Princess of Wales, and a bunch of other, people. She's from Cambridge University. She's just a really good person who can turn what is quite highfalutin science and, academic thinking into stuff that even I can understand. So that's got to be a good thing.
Yeah, we call it fireman proof. So perfect.
Okay, good. Yeah.
All right. Well, the last question before we make sure where people can find the book: what do you do to decompress apart from sitting in the middle of a construction area?
Yeah, sorry about that. When I can, I try and stay active, and not having a dog at the moment has made me lazier. When it's pouring with rain, it's a miserable day, and the dog, it's 6 a.m. and the dog wants to go out, you just go. Now I don't do as much of that until we have a replacement or the next generation. But I listen to podcasts, which people make fun of me because I do listen to them at twice speed because I've got too many that I want to listen to. So I find that quite relaxing. Other people find it highly stressful if they get in the car with me and this podcast is running at twice speed. They're like, what the hell is this? Slow it down. So I do podcasts, and I generally listen to podcasts when I'm running or walking. When I say running, I'm a slow plodder now because of various injuries, but I do like to get outside. So I run when I can because I've got so many friends who can't run anymore, and I sort of feel like I owe it to them. But I do enjoy just being out there. I wish I was fitter and faster, but age has its problems. And just getting outside and walking, really. I do love reading, but I don't do enough of it. I sort of go through phases, but yeah, just getting outside. And that's one of the things that I think can help all of us, just even if it's 5 minutes or 10 minutes, on a busy day, and just fresh air or fresh-ish air and just seeing trees and birds and just stuff that isn't your computer screen can be quite helpful.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. So Mindful Soldier, firstly, where can people find the book? When is it out again in the US and UK?
All good bookshops. It's available for pre-order now. The UK publication date is the 22nd of January, but pre-orders in Amazon, Waterstones, and all major UK stores. And then globally, in the US, I believe it's going to be Barnes & Noble and Amazon and all the major bookstores in the US. And then globally, if you just type Mindful Soldier, because of the shenanigans that I mentioned earlier with the change of publisher, there are still some sites that are showing the incorrect and the non-existent version, which has let's say a more clip-arty version of a mountain at the bottom. The book that is the one that you want to be ordering, if you're interested, it has a hand-drawn mountain with a climber going up the mountain. And as I mentioned earlier, all proceeds or all profits that I make, assuming there will be any, hopefully there'll be lots, 100% of all profits will be donated to international veterans charities. So I'm not keeping a penny because this isn't about me. So hopefully you'll enjoy the read anyway, and you might learn something or find it comforting or inspirational or motivational. But if not and you hate it, then I'm sorry, but you'll still be helping veterans. So that's good. So
there we go.
Christmas presents, go for it. Yeah. Yeah.
All right. And if people want to learn more about you, follow you on social media, where are the best places there?
I've tried to be simple. So I've got one handle that covers all the different platforms. I can't say I'm a very good social media person. I have TikTok and all these other things, but I'm not. I probably need somebody to help me do it better. But it's Ash Alex Cooper, all one word. So at Ash Alex Cooper, and that'll be Instagram, Twitter, X, Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok, and
Brilliant.
LinkedIn. So
I just refollowed you because I got my page shut down yet again on Instagram. Yeah,
you
Instagram.
unfollowed me?
No, I didn't unfollow you. I've in the year I had been shut down twice. Both times, I mean, all I post is usually just kindness, compassion, community, and then perspective standing in the middle. And I guess the divisive algorithm doesn't like it because I had a target on my back twice now. So yeah, out of the blue, I was shut down completely, and so now it's Behind the Shield 911.3.0. So yeah.
Okay, I'll follow you back then. I thought I was following you already. So
you were twice.
Okay.
All right.
Try not to upset anyone, or do upset. I mean, it's good to upset people occasionally.
I think that's the point. I think if you get shut down and you haven't done anything
right.
untoward, then you're doing it right. You're shaking the right tree. Yeah. Anyway, I want to thank you so much. It's been such an amazing conversation, to kind of really explore some of these areas that you've written about, and then look back at some of the things that we discussed in the past has been phenomenal. So I want to thank you so much for being so generous with your time and coming back onto the Behind the Shield podcast today.
Well, I just hope there's still some people listening that they made it through the 2 hours of our musings. But thank you for the time. I do appreciate it. And I really value our friendship. And thank you for everything you do to support this community. It's a really powerful community. And I would love to do more to support you in supporting them. So hopefully the book will be some way going towards that. So thank you.